This is Robert Clinkybeard and David Anderson with the Commercial Landscapers Podcast. We're going to take 20 minutes of your life to deliver some amazing business content from accomplished leaders to bring you value, scale your business, and better yourself personally. We hope you really enjoy the show, and I encourage you to share with your network so they can subscribe and we can expand these messages globally. We are also super excited to be supported by two brilliant sponsors. If you're tired of measuring properties, Site Recon platform fully automates measurements so you can focus on sales. So think measurements, think Site Recon. The other sponsor is Company Cam, who make it dead simple to communicate, document, and problem solve with guys in the field, no matter where you are. Company Cam brings documentation, communication, and liability protection together in one simple, easy to use app for you and your entire team. Company Cam is the only app every landscaper needs. Check it out. This is Robert Clinkybeard with the Commercial Landscapers Podcast. I am super excited today to be joined by Richard Medcalf. Welcome, Richard.
Hi, Robert. Great to be here. Thank you for inviting me on. Looking forward to this.
No problem. I've got some great accents here, so I'm looking forward to our conversation.
There we go. Yeah, stretching the globe.
Yes. So, Richard, I loved your bio here where it talked about this is what you describe yourself as what when you put a McKinsey consultant, a slightly unorthodox pastor, and an entrepreneur into a blender. I love that. That's a great talking point right there.
Yeah, it's like, will it blend? I don't know whether you ever saw those YouTube videos they did a while back. Will it blend, right? They'd take an iPhone and they'd take various things and blend them in the blender. So I thought that's what I would apply to me.
I love that. You're an executive coach, you're a leadership consultant to exceptional founders and CEOs. You've got a master's degree from Oxford University where you came top of your year. So well done for that. And you'd advised various founders and C-level execs for 20 years. So why don't you go into a little bit more depth just to give you the highlights of your career, please?
Yeah, well, hey, as I say, talking about myself is my favorite subject, so do shut me up in about 30 seconds if I'm boring you all. But I guess in a nutshell, if I go back to that blender thing, actually, it's quite helpful perhaps as a lens. So I talk about McKinsey consultant, slightly unorthodox pastor, and an entrepreneur, put them in a blender. And I suppose what I often say is I work at the intersection of strategy, leadership, and purpose. Which is kind of those three characters, I suppose you might say, mixing them up. What that really means is I love helping leaders who are already achieving great things. They're probably a CEO or a C-level executive or not far off, and they've got to a certain level, and yet they know there's another level ahead, right? They know that they're going to have to re-engineer their success formula, normally get out of the weeds, get out of the operational details, and start thinking more strategically than ever, having more influence than before, and really working on the levers that move it. And that's kind of like what I'm all about. And the reason in terms of my life story for that is, I guess I've always thought as a strategist, I think, figuring out how to have the biggest results with the least possible effort was, always a bit of a personal challenge, a personal game. It worked well for me, right? Academically, it did really, really well. I went into consulting, strategy consulting. And again, that was just a great fit for, I think, the way I think, the strategic mindset, and became the youngest ever partner in a tech-focused strategy consulting company. Then I went to Cisco for about 11 years, working on really helping C-level execs in Cisco's partners and customers really think through how technology could enable them to do new things in this world of complexity and ambiguity and uncertainty and everything else that we're in. So kind of helping them take that strategic perspective. And then, I guess 4 or 5 years ago, I kind of had a look and I said, well, I've got a great role in Cisco. At that point, I was working for a small team set up by the CEO of Cisco and the global head of sales to really catalyze these strategic partnerships and new business initiatives. It was a lot of fun. I described it as basically fulfilling the rash commitments made in meetings between top executives. We'd get the phone call saying, they're really excited about doing this with us, but we have no idea what that really means. Can you go and figure it out? So it's a lot of fun. But I think my aha moment was I started to realize, what do I want to say to my grandchildren or my great grandchildren when I'm 90, and they're on my knees and they're saying, Granddad, what did you do in this world? What did you do? And obviously I don't want to talk about my family and all, important things like that. But then they pushed me, well, what did you do in your job? And I realized I didn't want to just say, I helped AT&T or whoever it is, make 0.5% better EBITDA margins. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. And I enjoy helping leaders who've got big financial goals to achieve. But I realized that for me, what was going to be important was that personal angle as well, right? So was I able to invest in people to help them make a bigger difference, make a bigger positive impact in the world? And that's kind of what really lights me up. This idea that, we don't get what we want, we get who we are. And so as a leader, if we want a new set of results, we want more impact in the world, we need to have a look at how are we showing up, which is obviously, I guess, your Iron Man mindset is going to be a key part of it, right?
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah. No, I love that, and how you've just changed your shift from, working on the people element. I work with a bunch of companies, and when I first go into a company, I think that many times I see the CEO, founder working in the weeds a lot, mainly because, the pool of, dealing with fires, dealing with all the stuff that's going on every single day is really easy to work on. So, how do you change them from working for more operational tasks to maybe working on more of that operational time and strategic projects?
Yeah, it's a great question. You're right. In fact, literally an hour before this meeting, I was talking with the chief executive exactly the same thing. She said, Richard, I'm in the weeds. I know it. I can't see, I'm in the weeds, apart from once a month where I have to come up and report on it all, and then I'm back into it again. Right. A really, really vivid description. So it's a common thing. And I suppose the place I always start is to say that this is not, you don't need a tip or trick for this, right? It's not just it's not even about having a system, although a system is part of it. The challenge is, first of all, is a mindset challenge. Secondly, there is a behavior change challenge. And thirdly, there is a leadership challenge. So let me explain what I mean by that. Is if you want to free yourself up for strategic activity, the first thing is you have to look at what are your beliefs about what is necessary, important, essential, desirable, etc. Normally, we're all doing the things that made us successful last year and not the things that are going to make us successful next year. And so if you're a founder, what made you successful, or a CEO, you might have come up through the ranks, or you might have been, built your business because you were able to get in there, say yes to everything, be the cleverest person in the room, solve all the problems, drive the team, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And at a certain level, you can't do that anymore. You're now the bottleneck,
right? And
you can't go any further.
Yeah.
And so that can happen for various reasons. Sometimes people, what's going on in their head is by perfectionism, right? Like, no one can do it as well as me. If that's the case, right? Yeah. So often that can happen. I like to joke and say, so basically you're going to be the high performing janitor, then, are you? So you're going to polish up that floor tile, really, really, it's going to be the best floor tile, whilst the rest of the building goes unswept, or right. or you haven't mended the windows or whatever it is. So sometimes we have to accept some things might not be done as perfectly as we want, but we've got bigger fish to fry.
Right.
Another one can be around being, you want to be a support for your team. You want to get back to your team. You don't want to be, you want to help your team. One executive I worked with, he said, I'm stuck in my email because I'm not getting onto the big transformational projects I know I need to drive. And I kind of explored why. And he said, well, eventually he realized, well, it's because I want to be a trustworthy and reliable team player. I don't want my colleagues to be waiting around, or waiting for an email from me. I want to be responsive and getting back to them. Well, I said, at which point, there's no tip or trick or system I can teach you that's going to help you, because your identity of being a trustworthy and reliable person and a team player is coming from the way that you are demonstrating that in your inbox. as you process all these messages, right? So let me ask you a question instead. I said to him, what does your CEO want you to be doing? If he was in the room, what would he be asking you to be doing? Oh, well, these big transformational projects. What if, your customers were here? What would they ask you? Oh, well, these big projects, they would make a big difference for them. What about the employees? Oh, yeah, well, they really want these projects. It's going to modernize the workforce and experience. It's going to be amazing. So we went through the stakeholders, and obviously everybody would basically say, well, the biggest thing you can do for us is to deliver on these big projects. And so I said, well, so I put it to you, my tongue a bit, not exactly in my cheek, but pushing him a bit. I said, so what you're telling me is actually when you're doing your emails, that's just the easy stuff. That's where you're actually being irresponsible and untrustworthy. And if you were to actually focus on these big projects, which are why you're being paid the big bucks, frankly, at that point, you're being trustworthy and reliable. And they got it. It was a mindset shift. At that point, I didn't need to tell him how to set up filters in his Gmail or whatever he needed to do, because he got, oh yeah, my identity is actually different. My identity is I'm the high-level leader who needs to make some big things happen, and this email is actually a massive trap.
Yeah.
And so it's the mindset first.
That's true. Well, it's almost he's almost proven himself by being put into that CEO leadership level, so he doesn't necessarily have to prove himself anymore. I mean, he's already there.
Yeah.
So, the fact that he's being responsive to emails, trying to prove something. So obviously you had good success there. Was there anything else that you feel as though they have to change their?
So I mean, there's various mindset issues that might you could get into around that. But then the next one is the behavior change, right? So behavior change is, how am I actually going to make a change in what I do? I'll give you there's plenty of things we could go into. But I'll just give you perhaps one to start with, which would be science people will put in their diary, like, I know, I'll block out time. I'll put an hour strategic thinking slot in my diary. And then people don't do it. Right. 9 out of 10 times they delete it, they move it, they just do their email. The reason is emails, for example, or a meeting or whatever, it's a really clear, defined activity set by somebody else, so you don't even have to think about what to do. You just pick up here's an email ready to reply to, or here's a meeting to attend. It's set by somebody else. It's all the work, all the definition has been happened. All you have to do is kind of like process it, and you get a nice little mental reward at the end.
Yeah, that's true. It's an easy win as well.
Exactly, it's an easy win, and it's there for you. And then if you compare that with this scary time called strategic thinking, which is undefined, you're not quite sure what success is going to look like at the end of this hour. You could quite easily waste this hour, perhaps, or you might, what are you going to do with it? It's this undefined, ambiguous thing. No wonder people run away from it. So what I like to say, it is a good idea to start to block out time, but start with a really, start with like a 15-minute or 10-minute activity and be really clear about what it is. And if you don't know what it is, then set yourself a 10-minute task to brainstorm how I could use 15 minutes productively. What could I do? How, if I was to have 15 minutes to think, what would I like to think about? And just make that your first task, thinking about what you want to think about.
Yeah, I love it.
And so let's imagine that you come up, but let's imagine that you say, oh, I know what I want to think about. I need to think about, how am I going to, what does each member of my team need to perform at a higher level? Let's just say, to think of that example. Now, suddenly you can put in a half an hour slot in your diary saying, for each of my 8 direct reports, brainstorm 3 to 5 things that I could do to help them perform at a higher level. That's now a piece of strategic thinking that you can do. It's defined, and when you've done it, and it will take you half an hour or whatever, and you can go, oh, I've got it. I've now got a first draft of what I could do. Or, let me brainstorm 10 companies or research 5 companies that we could possibly acquire. Or let me, write down the criteria. If we were to acquire a company, what would the 10 things that would have to be true?
Yeah.
Right. What would they be? That's the kind of thing that you can do. But if you write in your diary, just think strategically, it ain't going to happen.
Yeah. No, so true. I mean, I'll give you another example. Is I go into many companies, and a lot of the companies will put on training on their strategic plan. Maybe what it might be one of their projects they want to. But in most companies, I'll see a lot of them don't even hit the target, and I think partly because they just get almost like frozen because it's such a big project or such a big task. Whereas what you're talking about is just almost like breaking it down to smaller bite-sized chunks and allow them to just get the ball rolling. That makes sense?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, training is another interesting one because training, again, it's a big, complicated concept. How do you know when you're done? It's nice to ask yourself as a question, like, what do I need to learn to perform at a higher level, right? Or what do I need to know in order to get better results on the project that I'm now doing?
Right.
So if you start to reframe it in that kind of very outcome orientated term, then it becomes a lot easier, right? And again, it's also the difference between learn photography, learn to play the guitar, or learn photography. If you want to take up a hobby, that's like a vague thing, right? You can never do that, right? You can never learn to play the guitar. It's always I've been learning for 30 years. Whereas if you say like learn to play, Back in Black on the guitar, then you've got a particular thing that you're now going to put your attention on, and when you've done it.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think it applies the same on any of these kind of strategic initiatives.
So what, going back to the example you gave about, I'm a big believer, I call them quality time blocks, where you're blocking off time in your calendar. And yes, you could easily put down strategic thinking, but I mean, it almost, I see it not only strategic thinking, but then you're talking about actually detailing out what that should be, trying to give as much of a goal or description as possible. So some type of a framework.
I'm really, I mean, it's not always the case, but I think generally we need some prompts, right? So, I have quite a rhythm. I'll be honest, I don't always respect the rhythm. I fall off the wagon like anybody else, but I do have a rhythm of, on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis, taking intentional time out to think strategically. But what I find is that if I don't have a checklist, it's hard.
Right.
But if I have some questions to get my thinking going, like what was the best thing that happened over the last year? What was the biggest challenge that I experienced over the last year? In the year ahead, what would be the one project that would make the biggest difference in the business, right? Or what would be the one metric that I'd like to see changed the most, or what's the biggest, what was the least valuable 20% of my time in the last week? Or what was the most valuable 20% of my time in the last week? How can I do more of that? Or what's the biggest risk in the business that I need to be mitigating?
Right.
All these kind of things. When you have those questions, then you can start to think differently.
Yeah. How about just, I suppose, just questions around, I feel not enough is done to research things like competition. Marketplace, there's obviously trends are changing, there's competition always changing. And I think, again, many leadership or CEOs are still working in the weeds. What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's a good question, because often CEOs get into their internal bubble and plans are made without thinking about what would other people do. So there's a couple of things which you can do that. One of which is to actually structurally build, get people working on a disconfirming evidence, right? Like, so if you have a strategy, ask a couple of people to go away and come back with how your competitors are going to walk all over this strategy, like exploit it, how it's going to be the best news. How is this strategy going to be the best news ever for our biggest competitors? Right. So you can say, oh yeah, well, whilst they're doing the big reorg, we're just going to go out with a massive marketing campaign, and we're going to win all the market. Or they're going to bring out this massive thing, and we're very, invest all this money in this new product, and we're just going to reduce the price on the existing product because it's dirt cheap for us to make, or whatever it is. Right. Again, getting other people to actually think about the moves of others, I think, is a great move.
Yeah.
The other one, I get a lot of my CEO clients increasingly, together to help them get different perspectives from outside the organization. So, business people in non-competing but perhaps adjacent businesnesses, and get them to kind of stress test each other's ideas as well.
That's a good idea. Yeah, I like that idea. Do you do that mainly in person? Do you do that virtually, or combination?
Yeah, so it varies. I'm actually just putting together the cohort for next year for 2022, and that's going to be primarily a virtual kind of CEO mastermind, mainly for people in fast-moving, tech-driven businesses. Not startups, so they've got to have significant revenues, because again, if you've got a real ongoing business, it's a very different set of challenges than if you're just trying to raise your first financing round, right? So try to keep people relatively similar together. And then, these days it's mainly virtual, although we'll probably try to do a retreat for a couple of days at some point in the year, but COVID permitting, so we'll see where that goes.
So jumping back onto building some real quality time for strategic thinking, working on strategic projects. I mean, again, a lot of the excuses I hear are too much going on, I don't have enough time. I mean, what do you usually say to those CEOs that come up with that excuse?
So there's two ways to look at it. So the first point I make is that strategic margin is everything. Strategic margin is the amount of time you have in your week to invest in things which are going to free you up in future, make things easier in the future. And so if you're running around, you've got no time, you are on the hamster wheel, and it's going to be incremental progress. It's going to be incremental progress. Whereas if you can just free up that 15 minutes that you can then reinvest in training your team, developing your team, building a system, extracting yourself in other ways, then that's going to come back. And suddenly in a month, you're going to have more than 15 minutes. You're going to have that time to come back as a return on your investment. And you're going to keep going. And I think that the difference between the hamster wheel and the flywheel is it's really that choice of, am I just using my time just to keep the lights on, just to do the same old? Or am I really investing it so that next time I have a similar project, a similar initiative, it's a similar customer, it's not me that has to do it, somebody else can take this on. So the first thing I try to help them realize, it's a choice they get to make, and they're going to have to do it now, or they can do it in a year or 2 years, but the longer they wait, the more the growth is going to be impacted. And then what I try to focus on instead is, I say to them, but stop trying to free up time. Yeah, you probably can't free up time in your current situation. But here's the question: what's the high value task that you're not getting to at the moment? What's the thing that you should be doing and you're not doing? One of my CEO contacts said that he became an expert in delegation overnight. It was very simple. He said his wife became seriously ill and was taken into hospital. So he dropped everything, dealt with his wife. That was the most important thing. And so all the excuses fell away and it all got delegated. And she was okay. He came back and he was able to pick up with a lot of a lower run rate because things were being done. And so when you have a high value activity, like looking after your wife in hospital, or the next strategic project that you need to get to, and when you start to put that time, make time for that, then the other stuff is more likely to be able to be put in its place. You're likely to make time for that. So I think for me, the secret then, if people are struggling, is to actually bring them face to face with what is the choice that you are already making? What is the thing that you're already saying no to at the moment? Every yes is a no for something else. And probably when people are saying I haven't got time, it's because they're involved in some good stuff, but what's the thing that they're not getting to? What's that higher value activity?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it's so true. So many CEOs I see struggle at that delegation part. But you're right. If something important comes along, like a health issue, then it's amazing how quickly that can change.
Yeah, and I say all this stuff. It can feel on the one end of it. It can feel really, really almost impossible. I worked with a manager in a company. I was going through one of my programs. I run a program called the Executive Productivity Accelerator. So CEO work and that kind of stuff is normally one-to-one, but occasionally I'll do a program for some more mid-level managers. Normally at the request of my clients. And this is one manager. He was like a mid-level finance manager, and he said, like, I'm totally maxed out. The commissions, your payroll, year month end. I have to do it all. My team can't do it for various reasons. I'm the only one who knows how to do it. I'm totally maxed out. I've got no work-life balance. I'm working the weekends, crazy stuff. Within about 2-3 months, pretty much 2 months, he said, I went to my boss and asked him, what else should I do? Because I've got this freed up time. It was actually, for him, he couldn't believe it, but there weren't that many changes to make. He had to just see things in a different light. He had to realize his team, he could actually train his team. He could actually delegate. He could trust them a bit more, right? He could see his role not as having to be the superhero leader doing it all himself, but actually as the empowering manager who was going to grow his team so that they could do it. And once he made that shift, he was able to take big things on his plate and realize it doesn't have to be on my plate anymore. And a massive difference. But when he started, it didn't feel believable. That's why I go back to mindset so often. It's like we need to get past the story that we're telling ourselves. And in the example you gave, this CEO saying, "Oh, I can't do it now. I'll have to get to that next quarter or in 6 months' time." That's just a story that they're telling themselves.
Yeah. That's true. No, because I think, I think when that time is freed up, when they start to delegate things to other people, and, it's funny how people can suddenly take those projects on board, and they start improving as individual employees. They get an opportunity to show themselves in a more of that leadership type role. But, the CEO is then able to then go in and spend time coaching them, mentoring them, which I think, which is huge. Yeah. So I definitely enjoy doing that. When I made that shift into more working on the business, it was just great to see all my employees just develop and, just get motivated and really feel empowered to make a difference in the company. It's tremendous.
Yeah. I think that's some of my story really, is that actually when you're seen as a top performer or high performer, you take that identity and you try and do things too much. You try and do too much yourself because, you're seen as a great contributor. You can solve problems faster than the next guy, or you can deal with, you probably make what you think is the best decision that anyone can make on these subjects. And it's actually learning to actually go, okay, this is no longer my greatest area of contribution. My greatest area of contribution has got to be to, as you said, develop these people, focus my attention on other things, and I have to leave it behind. And it's a bit tough, right? It's tough for people because we've got a lot of kudos from doing what we've done really well, and yet that's not the game in the next season of our lives.
Yeah, that's so true. So Richard, we're running out of time here. Great conversation today. I've certainly learned a lot. How do people get in touch with you, and they want to ask you questions, they want to learn bits of some of your techniques, some of your tools that you use in your business?
Yeah, it's a couple of places. So you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find my podcast. It's called the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. We get into this question of exactly what we're talking about. How do you multiply your impact when you're at a high level in business? And there's also a little email course that I developed, which is totally free, called Freeing Yourself Up for Strategic Activity. And it tries to tackle exactly these things that we've just been talking about, right? How do you change your productivity paradigm as an executive to work on the things that matters? And you can find that at my website. So it's xquadrant.com/go/productivity. And there's about, 8 or 10 emails that you can get on that topic, which might be a useful resource.
Awesome. Well, cool. Well, thank you, Richard. Really appreciate your time today. Audience, I'd love you to listen to the show and download it, share it with all your friends and family. But really appreciate all of your audience listening today. And thank you, Richard, for your time.
It's been a pleasure.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hopefully that was pure dead brilliant for you today, and we've got some great takeaways for your business and your personal life. This is Robert Clinkybeard along with David Anderson, and we'd love to get you and your friends to join us on our journey. 2 quick things before you go, listeners. Check out our website, thecommerciallandscaper.com. You can subscribe, you can share with your friends, but more importantly, check out our sponsors. We have Site Recon, who are going to help to capture measurements on your property and create a really streamlined process. And we have Company Cam, who make it dead simple to communicate, document, and problem solve with guys in the field, no matter where you are. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.